Dennis, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Well, it gives me a great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who I saw many, many years ago when I first got really involved in the JFK Assassination research. He was in the video for Best Evidence by David Naval. And if you haven't seen it, it's on YouTube, Google, Best Evidence, and it's a phenomenal video in my opinion. Dennis tonight is going to be speaking on The Second Coffin, the film, and the death of William Pitzer. It's my honor to introduce Dennis David.
Good evening. When I talk about these things, I sometimes get emotional, so I beg your pardon for how I feel, because it struck home to me in a very personal way. There were two coffins brought to Bethesda that night. One of them arrived at 6:35 in a shipping casket. The second was a bronze casket that arrived at about 7 o'clock, some 25 minutes later. The shipping casket came in a black hearse with civilian drivers, 6 men in suits sitting behind that eased the casket out onto the jetty right outside the morgue. I had my men take that casket into the anteroom of the morgue, and then I went back up to the front of the National Naval Medical Center. I was on the second floor, heard a lot of commotion outside. I looked out and saw an area about 3 football fields in area, jammed with people. You couldn't even see a blade of grass. Wisconsin Avenue just on the other side was wall-to-wall cars, bumper to bumper. The circular driveway, semicircular driveway in front of the medical center was lined on both sides with Washington, D.C. police, Bethesda police, Shelby County police, Maryland state troopers, numerous Marines, numerous sailors. And as I was watching out, about 7 o'clock, I see this Washington, D.C. police car pull in, followed by a gray Navy ambulance. And I found out later that bronze casket was in it. Later, when I found out there was some controversy about that, the next week I'd asked Dr. Boswell, who was one of the pathologists that worked on the post-mortem that night, I said, which casket was he really in? And he said, you should know you were there. I was only back at the morgue for one delivery. And then they come up and said, well, there was another casket that came in that had an Air Force major. And I said, okay, so they tried to say he was in the shipping casket. At that particular time in the year, and I did it many times after I came back to stateside from Vietnam, the procedure was, if you had a military man that died on active duty, he was maybe put in a shipping casket. One other military man of the same outfit or related would escort that body, not 5 or 6 Secret Service agents. That would have been totally ridiculous. So I have no doubt that bronze casket that we received that night contained the body of John F. Kennedy. And I've done something I normally don't do. I've given several talks. I've never used it. Tonight I'm using notes so I can remember some of the names, because at my age, I don't remember things too well. So, that's the only thing I can tell you about the 2 shipping caskets. In fact, at 2 o'clock the next morning, on Saturday morning, I went up to the snack bar and got something to drink, coffee, because I needed it badly. There were rumors there was 3 caskets bought in that night, not 2. All kinds of rumors were running thick and fast everywhere. One of the rumors that came in was, hey, did you know that they brought in a brain to the emergency room at the Naval Hospital, put it in an emesis patient, put it on a gurney, and took it down to the morgue? Everything was, rumors were already this flying sick and fast. They were afraid that they said, we're going to try to kidnap the president's body. That's why they did all this. I had talked to the driver of the hearse. What he told me was they had brought the casket up in the hearse, the black hearse, up 16th Street, onto Jones Bridge Road, and came in the back door of the hospital. And then, after delivering the body, they left. Which way they went, I don't know. I didn't pay attention because I was already headed back up front, checking my men to see if anybody had tried to break in at for whatever reason. We had a lot of curiosity seekers, people around trying to do. Is really a little bit morbid. The formal casket, whatever happened to it, I have no idea. I never saw it that night. On the following Monday, I was a first class enlisted man. I had enrolled in a program to gain a commission. There was a man named William Pitzer, who was a lieutenant medical service corps, who kindly decided to be one of my mentors to help me out. So I had gone over on Monday after the autopsy to talk to Bill about the test coming up in January, and seeking his advice. And when I walked in the door, he said, Denny, you come here, you gotta see this. On his desk, he had a film editor. And on the editor was a 16mm film, and he had been looking at it. He also had black and white color photos on his desk. All of them were of the autopsy. None of you have ever seen those pictures to this date, or even about the film, because the government said they don't exist. The hell they don't. I saw the damn things. On those films that were quite clear, Bill and I observed an entry wound approximately here, an entry wound here. And during that film, they showed the body was rolled up on his side, and we observed an entry wound about 6 inches down from the neck and about 1.5 inches to the right of the spinal column. We also observed an exit wound which involved and was approximately this size, involving the parietal and occipital bones back here, and did not involve the bones in this area, which the pictures you've seen show a huge flap from the temporal bone. years later, at the request of a researcher, I drew on a skeletal diagram of the wounds that I saw. I had never seen what Parkland doctors had said, but this investigator took my drawings, compared them to what was seen at Parkland, and they matched almost exactly. They were not the films and the pictures that David Lipton had in his book, because the ones he got had come from what they released, what the Warren Commission eventually would release. I went on, and during that night, at about 2300 hours, I was down in the hallway outside the morgue, and the administrative watch officer for the Naval Hospital saw me and said, "David, do you know anybody that is a mat tech and can type?" And I said, and it has security clearance. And I said, "Yes, I'm a mat tech, I can type, and I'm cleared through secret." He said, "Well, this gentleman needs to have a memorandum typed up. Where can we do it?" He said, "Follow me." So I took him up on the second deck to the Naval Medical School administrative office, and I said, "I'm gonna dictate," and the agent then dictated to me a memorandum. For the record, the following was removed from the head of John F. Kennedy during postmortem procedures this date. And while he was dictating to me, he set this pillbox down on the desk beside my typewriter. And the verbiage was, item 1, metal, so many centimeters by so many centimeters by so many centimeters, or millimeters, excuse me, not centimeters, so many millimeters by so many, in other words, width, length, and depth. And there was 4 of them. When he finished the dictation, he took I pulled the memorandum out, handed it to him, and while he was proofing it, I picked this pill vial, uncapped it, poured them out in my hand. There were 4 pieces of what to me was obviously bullets, little pieces. Too much there for 1 bullet, maybe not enough for 2. Then I put them back in the vial, and he put it in his pocket. Then he proceeded to take the papers, the carbons, reached over and pulled the tape cartridge out of the IBM Selectric, and then turned around and started out. Got to the door, turned around, and he says, "Be advised, this is to be treated as classified information and you're not to talk about it." Well, hell, I knew what classified meant because I'd been in the Navy long enough. So, and I went on. The next Monday, I walked in when I saw Bill Pitzer, and he was looking at this film and everything. And things began to gel, began to question everything that seen happen at that time. So I went on, and finally in '65, I did get commissioned as an ensign Medical Service Corps. I was sworn in first week of December 1965. Bill was there, come over, give me a big hug, and said, "Well, shipmate, probably won't serve with you anymore," he says, "because I'm going to retire next year." And he said, I've had some lucrative offers from major media. So I went on my way. I went to Portsmouth, Virginia, went to Knife and Fork School, or what they call Knife and Fork School, and Naval Justice School. And then from there went to Great Lakes Naval Hospital for duty. And in April of '66, Barb Monroe, who had been both Bill's friend and my friend at Bethesda, came in for duty. She had been transferred. She says, hey, did you hear about Bill? I said, no, I hadn't heard anything. And she said, that he'd been killed. And I said, what? He said, yeah, they're saying he committed suicide. And I said, that doesn't sound right. And she said, well, there was some question about it because his hand had been mutilated and it looked as if he'd been tortured. And I said, I wonder if that's because of the materials he had. And she said, did you know about those? And I said, yes, I saw them. And so we talked about it for a while, and never have later or years later through Dan Marvin and some others, I obtained copies of the in-house investigation of Bill's death. I got copies of the Shelby County Coroner's report. I got copies of the FBI report. And all I can tell you is if a lieutenant that worked for me that did that investigative report, I'd have fired his butt in a minute. This is a sloppy piece of work. Then I got a hold of a death certificate on Bill, and who was signed off on the autopsy report, but Spink, who had been one of the autopsy procedures, had been involved with Boswell and Humes in doing the autopsy on the president. Didn't make sense to me. Bill Pitzer was a friend, more than a friend. He's the reason, one of the reasons I managed to succeed in the Navy. I spent 22 years there. He was a great help to me. He was my mentor, and I loved him dearly. I never believed, and still do not believe, that he committed suicide. He was assassinated because he had material that would have blown the Warren Commission report clear out of the water. I've given many lectures since then and talked to people and tried to get across, yes, there are government officials that would not hesitate to increase their power and control by having somebody killed. I know it's difficult for me to accept that at first because, you know, I love this country. My great grandfather fought in the Revolution. My wife's great grandfather fought in the Revolution. Her grandfather fought in the Civil War. So my family on both sides have always been patriots and a great believer in our government. And I'll tell you, since 1963, that faith has gone south a little bit. And this last election just makes my stomach hurt. I'm going to be 80 in a couple of months. And I'm getting old and I'm getting tired. So I hope you youngsters out there carry on and hold the government people, hold it to the fire. And maybe my great grandkids And I've got 16 of them. Maybe they will one day find out the truth of what happened in 1963. And I know that I'm going to keep eyes on what's going on. I may not get to another meeting like this. I never know, you know, at my age. And I'm getting tired. I really am. And thank you all for coming. It's a real pleasure to see so many people that are still interested. I might add that one thing happened to me today that has never happened before. I went over to visit an old friend at the Adolphus, Deborah Conway. I've known her for 14, 15 years. And while I was there, she says, come with me. She said, CBS, the local CBS news people want to interview you. So for the first time in 53 years, I was talked to by somebody in a major media. It might even be on air, might have been aired this evening, I don't know. But times have changed, so thank you for listening. And
Thank you, Dennis. Wow. By show of hands, how many of you have seen the video, Best Evidence, where David was in? Where Dennis David? I encourage you, especially after seeing this man speak, watch it. It's phenomenal. I remember, Dennis, when I saw it for the first time, the thing that caught my attention the most was you're being perplexed by why couldn't they just let us know the truth? Why couldn't they? Well, folks, we're going to have a little bit of an opportunity. Oh, you want to do a question and answer? Excellent. Dennis, would you? We have time.
I couldn't even read it.
I told you I'd get emotional. Yeah.
Can you hear me or?
Check the button, should be green.
It should be, but it's not.
Push it.
Which button?
On the top there.
That's right.
Hello?
I can hear you.
Now, Mr. David, you were good enough to discuss with me a little earlier this afternoon some of the events that transpired that you talked about tonight. The world saw a gold or ornamental casket with Jackie and Bobby Kennedy come in the front door. You've experienced receiving a shipping casket at the back door, correct?
Yes.
Putting my little attorney hat on here for a moment. What is the frequency with which you would receive a shipping casket? Is this something that occurs once a month?
Maybe once every 10 years, if that often.
Okay. So the odds then of a presidential assassination victim coming in the front door and some random military officer coming in the back door would be astronomical, would they not?
It would be, yes.
So you really don't experience
I
shipping.
doubt that, to be honest with you, I doubt that that's ever happened.
So we're asked to believe
Yeah.
a monumental coincidence
Yeah.
that some random military officer,
Yeah.
accompanied by Secret Service men,
Yeah.
came in the back door while Bobby and Jackie came in the front door with an ornamental casket.
You might say it's almost that maybe it was intentional.
Thank you. And I thank you for your remarks. Everybody, don't forget Monday, the screening of John Barber's film at the Texas Theater.
Hi, Dennis. We met in Chicago last year.
Yes.
William Hall shooting that documentary. And since this is going to be on YouTube, I wanted to bring this to your attention. I think you said something in the beginning that you meant the reverse of.
What's
When-
that?
When you were talking about the two caskets.
Yeah,
At the end, when Dr. Boswell said, when you asked him which casket was President Kennedy's body in, and he said, you should know you were there, he meant you standing on the loading dock.
Yes.
With the metal casket.
yes,
Because your follow-up comment said, there's no doubt in my mind, Kennedy's body was in the bronze casket, but you meant shipping casket. right?
yes, yeah.
Okay, so
'Cause
I hope this is on the video, because the Kennedy, the Warren Commission people will use that little bit to say, hey,
Exactly.
okay. The other thing you discussed last year that was really interesting, if you want to go into it, is when you heard and saw the helicopter land,
Yes.
right? Could you go into that for just a minute?
About 2 minutes before the Gray Navy ambulance came onto Bethesda, there was a helicopter that landed, and 5 or 6 people got off of it, and what looked like a box. And some people interpreted that mean it was another casket. It may have been one of the reasons that there was rumors later about 3 caskets. But I found out later that that was the official escort of a sailor, Marine, Coast Guard, Air Force that had come and had been brought out from Fort Myers, I think it was. Ed?
Okay, Dennis and I have known each other for about 2 decades, and our mutual friend Rick Russo, there's nothing but great admiration for him, not only because of his passion, but also one of the things that's very important about witnesses is that sometimes they start to embellish, or they start to add some things that weren't there, or they start to change their views, and he's been consistent all the years that I've known him, and he actually shirks when I call him a hero, but he is every bit a hero, but he will accept the term patriot, when in fact he is both people, a patriot and a hero.
Thank you, Ed.
Well, in general, we've known what happened to President Kennedy since the 60s. But it's not so much a problem of research, it's a political problem. How can we get the media and the politicians to face our reality and deal with it? It's a political problem, not a research problem. And thank you for helping. But how can this political problem be surmounted when it seems like we're going the other way, away from peace, away from justice? What can we do? Thank you.
Yeah. I just keep putting on these programs and keep trying to get major media to cover it and help us out a little bit on it. One thing I will, maybe it'll help out. In 1992, Rick Russo had myself, Paul O'Connor, Jim Jenkins, Floyd Reeby, Gerald Custis, and he's not here yet, but Dr. Weck was there. And we reviewed photos, pictures, x-rays. The x-rays and the photos we found at that meeting were falsified or changed and adapted. And that's one of the reasons that I got more involved in it, because, and I knew that some of the pictures were not right that David Lifton had showed us. But subsequent to that, for what credibility it is, Rick called me about a year later, and he said, you know, we talked about hypnotic regression as about going back, help bring up memories. He said, would you be willing to do that? I said, hell, why not? It'd be fun. So he went to New York, and I met with this psychiatrist who has testified before the Supreme Court of the United States on the validity of hypnotic regression. I sat in there and they began to put me under, and I thought it was like 10 minutes later he woke me up. Actually, it was 3.5 hours. And then when Rick asked him, he says, what would you say, give it as a figure, on a 1 to 10 figure of Denny's, the validity of what he said? And the doctor looked at him for a minute and he says, well, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'll give him an 11. So, my memory has been good. I couldn't tell you what I had with the 2 young ladies here about an hour ago, but I can still tell you what everything I did on the 22nd of November 1963 from 1 o'clock in the afternoon till 8 o'clock the next morning. Yes, sir.
On that point, David, you borrowed $40 about 30 minutes ago.
Nice job.
Just a quick clarification for history regarding the casket coming off the helicopter. If I understand you correctly, I want you to correct me. A casket's hard to confuse with a bread box.
Yeah.
Did you not see this personally yourself, or did you just glance and see a box, or what? Because
Well, the helicopter came in,
yes, sir.
maybe a minute or so before the Great Navy ambulance came in, and I watched it just long enough to see people get off, and it looked like a box come off.
Maybe the end of the casket.
It was big enough to be a shipping casket because it was, you know, about 6 foot
Okay.
or 8 foot.
Just wanted to get that clear.
Yeah.
The real question I had for you was regarding the medical documents that you got copies of
Yes.
on Bill Pitzer. Can you do a quick elaboration? I don't want to take up everybody's time. 30 seconds of the physical condition regarding the hand and the body.
The autopsy only indicates that there was some mangling of one of his hands or something like that. But I never saw any pictures which verified that. I know that Mrs. Pitzer was told that they couldn't take the wedding ring off his hand because the fingers were mangled so badly. I've never seen anything as to why that was, but that was part of what the rumor was, that he'd been tortured. And so the investigation report was very sloppily done. It was done by some young lieutenant, and I don't mean to disparage him because I was a young lieutenant one time myself, but so I have no idea.
Denny, I just met you last month at the Oswald Conference in New Orleans. And unfortunately, I've only been studying it for 37 of my 52 years. But my question would be, through Bob Groden, Jim Fetzer, people that worked on the men who killed Kennedy, Paul O'Connor said that he arrived in a shipping casket in a body bag.
Yes.
Others have said that he arrived in a shipping casket in sheets. I was just wondering if you could elaborate either way, how his body arrived.
Well, up until '92, I had never talked with Paul O'Connor, Custis, Reedy, nor Jim Jenkins. But after '92, we were in frequent contact. And yes, Jim Jenkins said he was doing something else and not helping take the body out of the casket. However, Custis and Paul O'Connor both indicated that the body was in a body bag. And that he had, after they opened the body bag, and I don't know if any of you ever seen a body bag, you know what it looks like. It's just big enough, you know, and it has a zipper that runs from head to toe. And when they unzipped the body bag, they found a bloody cloth wrapped around his head. Sheet, sometimes they call it a sheet or cloth or something. Other than that, there was no clothes or anything on the body.
Thank you, Danny. Yeah, Charles Crenshaw was the last physician to observe the body when it was wrapped in sheets and a towel around its head when it was put in the bronze ceremony casket.
Yeah.
Confirms that aspect. And of course, I had conversations in Dallas with Jim Jenkins and Paul O'Connor and independently with Gerald Custer. And they all, of course, confirmed the story of him having been brought in a pinkish gray shipping casket of the kind that was commonly used to bring back bodies from Vietnam. And you stole my thunder because I was going to mention about the hypnosis. I think it was Rick who proposed the idea to test your recollection, where hypnosis works as a concentrated form of recollection. And he approached me, and I contacted David Mandick and Gary Aguilar, and we paid for your undergoing hypnosis we had to have an impeccable psychiatrist, a guy who had been used by the Secret Service, by the FBI, by other government agencies, so there'd be no question about the authenticity. I recall listening to the hypnosis session with you, and you were capable of recollecting every keystroke when you typed the memorandum, Dennis. And I just want to say, you know, how much I admire you, and I'm here to vouch for the authenticity of everything you said. And in addition, regarding Lieutenant Commander, your dear friend, no one who's going to commit suicide is going to mangle their hand so hard their wedding ring is crushed into the finger and it can't be removed. I mean, and the explanation for the vague autopsy report is it couldn't be more specific without giving away that the man obviously had been assassinated. So once again, I thank you, Dennis.
I have a copy of the President's death certificate, and there is one line in which Galler Funeral Home indicates the body was removed from a gray shipping casket. I don't remember the exact terminology, but it was removed. And I do know that Fink's name was on that birth certificate, or the death certificate, and his name was also on the death certificate for Bill. So it's just, things are too tied up, too close there. Yes, sir.
Tell me I'm not lucky. I get to follow Professor Fetzer, that's right.
I've known him for 2 years too.
Mr. David, first of all, thank you so much for taking your time and being here. But it was because of you that I purchased the book, Without Smoking Gun, which was a disturbing book to read. But you mentioned, I believe it was Captain Dan Marvin, and he's had some detractors, but I think most of us believe his story. I just wanted to know what your take on Dan Marvin was, because he comes across as a very honest person. So, and thank you again for being.
After the story, or the History Channel viewed the men who killed Kennedy, it was in about 97. At one time, one day was it that Russo called me and told me about his episodes in Chicago. I think it was around 98, 90. But one night I got a call from Rick Russo, and he said, "Are you sitting down?" And I said, "Why?" He said, "I've just come out of a meeting here in Chicago. I walked out, this guy walks up to me and says, 'Have you ever heard of a man named William Pitzer?'" And Rick said, his name had not been mentioned or even talked about. And he said, the man, and he said, no. He said, yes, I know about him. Why? He said, because I know who killed him. And my response was, what's the son of a bitch's name? He told me. I got a phone number. I called Dan Marvin and asked him, I said, I understand that you shot my friend. And he said, no, I didn't do that. So we talked, and I thought, okay, so I called him again, and I said, do you mind if I come out? So about a month or so later. So I drove out to Ithaca, New York, along with my wife, and I met Dan, and he told me the story of how he had been going to his school in Kentucky, which dealt with Secret Service and clandestine. And Dan told me, he said, at one time, he had done assassinations for the CIA in Southeast Asia and some other countries that he would decline to mention. And he said, I asked who. They told me it was Bill Pitzer. They said, where's he located? He said, they told me Bethesda, Maryland. And he said, I told them, no, I won't do it because I'll do it outside of Congress, but not within the limits of the United States. And I turned it down. He said, now at the same time that the CIA agent had called me out of school, a class, he also called another gentleman, and I have trouble remembering his name. He says, I don't know whether they offered him the same thing or asked him, but Dan remembered the name, and he had obtained a letter, a set of orders, which contained both this gentleman's name, at that time Lieutenant, and Lieutenant Pitts, or Dan Marvin was a lieutenant at this time, had both Dan's name and this other gentleman's name. So we called the Army, and the Army said, nobody of that name has ever been on active duty. But yet we've got a set of orders here, complete with name, first, last name, serial number, the whole ball of wax. Ultimately, yes, we found the man. And it turns out he is a physician practicing in a little town just across the Utah border in Oregon. We contacted him. Of course, that guy, he won't even talk to him. We'd never even discuss it with any of us. So I still don't know. I have no idea. But I'm convinced that Dan didn't have anything to do with the autopsy or the assassination of Bill Pitzer.
Hi, I'm Mr. David. Last year at this conference, we had Hugh Clark, one of the pallbearers
Yes.
that night, and he described how he and the other fellows that were with him were separated within a couple of days, if not hours, after that weekend, that night. Now, you mentioned that you were sent to Vietnam. Is there a pattern here that perhaps you guys also were separated and sent in different assignments throughout the world for that kind of thing? That might have shown a pattern here?
You bring up an interesting point, something I've thought about it too. Every Navy man, officer or enlisted, that went to Vietnam went through what they call field medical school at either Camp Pendleton or on the East Coast, except for one. I never went to FMF school, and I've often wondered if they thought that would be a way to make my disappearance.
What was the time frame? How long did it take?
I went to Vietnam in 1968 and was there.
Okay.
I went there in February of 1968, got there 2 days before 10. And I was there until May of 69 when I came back home, I guess.
For anyone who may be unaware of the history of the two caskets, the Secret Service forcibly stole the body from Parkland Hospital in the bronze ceremonial casket. It was uploaded on Air Force One during the swearing in of Lyndon Johnson, which actually wasn't necessary. Everyone was called forward. And during this period of time, the body appears to have been taken out of the casket, put into a body bag and into a compartment in the plane, which Boeing records verified was present on the plane. When they landed at Andrews Air Force Base, while all the attention was focused on Jackie and Bobby and unloading the bronze ceremonial casket, the body bag appears to have been offloaded on the other side into a helicopter, which was flown to Walter Reed, where the best forensic pathologists in the military were taking metal parts out of the body, though they, of course, left a few. And it was then put into the pinkish gray shipping casket and brought in the black ambulance over to the back of the morgue at Bethesda. Meanwhile, of course, the entourage with the gray ambulance and Jackie was approaching the building. Gerald Custer described to me, and I'm sure to many others, how he was headed upstairs with x-rays of the president because the autopsy was already taking place when he observed the entourage arriving and wondered what in the world could be going on because here he'd been taking x-rays of the body already undergoing autopsy.
Right. He was standing just below me. I was on the second floor of the rotunda, and he was just below me in the hallway, and both of us saw the same thing.
There was an elaborate ambulance chase that David has described in Best Evidence too.
They chased each other around.
He was the one who figured out that something very funny had happened here.
And
Your testimony and the others have confirmed.
And Huey would tell you about being in a pickup truck and trying to chase down the ambulance, no lights on, wondering where the hell they were at. Yes.
Dennis, you seemed to enjoy that muffalata in New Orleans a couple of months ago.
Hey, that was great. I appreciate it. I've never had one of those before.
So I brought you a bottle of Nucio's
Oh, God bless you.
There's a story behind this bottle. The Nucio family, I happen to meet, there's a guy named Steve who's a little younger than me, and I met his dad one day. He told me his son went to the farmer's market where I live, so I met him. And I said, what was your dad look like growing up? Looks like a brute. And he said, oh, he was a good guy. He says, I actually spent more time with my uncle. He used to run through the French quarters with his uncle, going to all those clubs and everything. His uncle was Carlos Marcello's bodyguard. So
Thank you.
I'll put this on your table.
Thank you very much. You make me feel very humble. Thank you.
Thanks again, Dennis. David.